Hello everyone. I'm here with Jamal. I will be with you for today's top story. Uh, this month, another turn of Iraqi-U.S. Strategic dialogue is going to happen, which is going to cover the U.S. Troops' presence here in Iraq. About this, the RAND Center has inducted an investigation about U.S. troops here in Iraq. For that topic, today we will be talking to Mr. Howard Schultz from RAND Center. Hello to you, Mr. Schultz.
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I would like first to start with this question. Well, one of the topic that has been covered most about your investigations is about sectarianism in Iraq. What do you see here in Iraq? Is it sectarianism or a national conflict?
Well, that's a very good question. Certainly during the last decade after the invasion of Iraq and the war, there were high levels of sectarianism. But we've seen that changing a great deal. And we saw that in particular during the protests in the fall of 2019, as well as the elections that preceded that, where people were really focused more on Iraq, approaching it more as Iraqi citizens than as from a sectarian viewpoint. So I think we've seen a change a little bit in Iraq, especially among the younger people. And that's certainly a position that the United States, as a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society, would be quite supportive of.
Okay, so according to your studies and investigations, how long does the roots of sectarianism go back in Iraq, especially after the regime change here happened in Iraq? Has anything changed, or as you know, as maybe you are aware, the sectarianism conflict has increased. So, what's your opinion about that?
Well, the sectarian conflict within Iraq among Iraqis, I think, has declined in the past few years. It certainly was very high in 2003, 2006 through 2008, and even in the early part of this decade, 2011 to 2014. But then when people saw the horrors of Daesh and the horrors of sectarianism, I think they started turning away. And so, again, especially among the younger people of Iraq, there's less of a sectarian outlook. Now, there is still a strong element of sectarianism. We see that to some extent in the Hashd al-Sha'bi, but otherwise among the population, we see that less and less.
باشه
Do you think the Kurdish movement here in Iraq and in Syria is a part of the conflict or the sectarianism conflict that we see in these two countries? Or do you think it's a national movement which is different from others?
Yes, so that's a very good question. I'm glad that you raised the Kurds. So often when we think of sectarianism, we'll think of Sunni versus Shia. But the Kurds, of course, stand separately because they, in particular, as the largest ethnic group in the world without their own country, they, in particular, having suffered oppression in the past, do stand out somewhat and have carved for themselves a place in Iraq. So it's very important to recognize Kurdish aspirations and Kurdish successes. Now, the pan-Kurdish movement, if we look at Syria and Iraq, I think it's natural to characterize that more as a national movement rather than a sectarian movement, because Kurds come in all different religions and all different families and these different languages. So more of a national movement. And the big challenge for the Kurds as a national movement is to define exactly what they want out of that. So there's always discussion of Kurdish independence, of a Kurdish country. There's discussion of autonomy, of how they fit in to the countries in which they're located. And the question that will need to be resolved by the Kurds themselves is in what form do they want to have their national aspirations met? And it could be, as it is now, as a region within a country, or there could be other solutions. But certainly there are a lot of commonalities among the Kurds across the borders, but there are also many differences. And I think if you look at the
In
history
Iraq, what will
of
be the solution?
oh no, that's something that's not something for me or for anyone else outside of Iraq to say. The solution needs to come from the Iraqi Kurds themselves in consultation with the Iraqi national government. This needs to be a very frank and open dialogue in Iraq among the Kurds and between the Kurds and all other Iraqis.
And now Iraq and the US are waiting for another turn of strategic dialogues, and which they are going to talk about their future relations. And you have made some studies about that. I would like to ask, according to your studies, how should the US stay in Iraq as a as a military force?
Very good. So we think it is to the advantage of Iraq and to the advantage of the United States for the United States to stay in Iraq to a limited extent. Now, we think there's an advantage to Iraq and to the United States, but quite frankly, if Iraq is a sovereign country, and the basis of the relationship between the United States and Iraq is recognition of that sovereignty. So if Iraq determines that the US must leave, then the US must leave. Now, we think we've done a study of this, so I will go back to.
So as you say, it benefits the both sides. What does the US gain in Iraq?
Very good. So the US gains several things. First of all, it is in the US interest to make sure that Daesh does not reemerge. Daesh still represents a danger to US allies and partners, to the region, and even to the United States. So the United States gains the advantage of being able to fight Daesh. Second, the United States has always benefited from having partners around the world. We have a very large formal alliance network, and we have a very large network of partners. It never hurts to have more partners. Iraq can be a very capable partner, and that partnership can be to maintain security in the region, to share intelligence, to cooperate on training, for mutual education. All of these things are part of the US-Iraq military and security relationship. So the United States has always relied on partners. Having partners is good. That's an important issue. And the second issue is countering Daesh, countering regional instability. And Iraq can be a valuable partner for that too.
So according to your latest report or study, you have mentioned the security and economy side. Why is the stability of Iraq important for the US?
Well, the stability of Iraq, the United States values stability around the world. The United States is a prosperous country because the globe is stable, because the United States can trade and invest, and you need stability for trade and investment. It is also important to have functioning energy markets, and Iran is an important contributor to global oil markets. Now, it must be said, the United States is not a big consumer of Middle East oil. So it's not that we need Iraqi oil or oil from Saudi Arabia to come to the United States. We have really our own oil, and we can get more from Mexico and elsewhere. What we need are globally stable oil markets. So the value of having regional stability is very important. The United States seeks that in every region. Iraq, as a central country, as a large country, can contribute to that regional stability.
4 saat.
Very good. So, in the past, Donald Trump, the US president, said the ISIS has ended on the ground, and so he decided to withdraw the troops in Syria. My question is ISIS resurgence a good reason for the US to keep its troop here in Iraq?
Well, so it is the main justification right now for troops in Iraq. I would refer you back in 2014 when ISIS first started taking over. The government of Iraq sent 2 letters to the United Nations Security Council asking for international help in defeating ISIS. And that is a large part of the justification of why the United States returned its troops to Iraq. Don't forget, the United States withdrew its troops from Iraq upon mutual agreement with Iraq back in 2011. So the justification for that really came formally from the Iraqi government in its communications with the UN Security Council. The United States continues to have that mission. ISIS was defeated as a territorial entity. President Trump did want to withdraw all troops from Syria, but there was a reconsideration and a realization that some small number of troops would be needed to make sure that ISIS did not come back. And that's exactly why we have retained troops in Syria, and that is a big reason why we have troops in Iraq as well. If the Iraqi government determines that there is absolutely no reason to keep those troops, then those troops will need to leave.
Pasha.
Okay, so as we see, there's some kind of trade or economic tension between China and the US, and the US still hasn't been able to reduce the influence of Chinese economy. Can the US do that? Can the US reduce the Chinese economic presence in Iraq?
It will be very hard. I don't think the United States necessarily wants to reduce the overall presence of China. What the United States is very concerned about with China is its technology theft, its violation of intellectual property, and its domination of high technology communications issues. And so the United States has been encouraging its allies and partners, for example, not to use Huawei equipment in their 5G infrastructure. Now, some of our European allies and other security partners have decided, in fact, they will not use Huawei in their 5G infrastructure. In the Middle East, that has not been the case. Many countries have determined that Huawei infrastructure is the best option in terms of cost and performance. And I do not think that the United States has been successful at stopping that, or quite frankly, has tried very hard to stop that. Each country has to make its own decision. Each country will face risks. There are risks to introducing Chinese technology into communication systems, particularly the risk to data security and to privacy. But there are also cost considerations and
Pasha,
cost
what
versus
is
performance
Professor
considerations.
Schatz?
Okay, so
So,
Mr. Schalt, I want to ask another question. It's very clear,
yes.
as you said. So, as you say, as you know, in the past few years, the Irani influence here in Iraq has been increased. Do you think by U.S. troops, if they remain, or if U.S. Increases its influence here in Iraq, can U.S. Like face the Iranian influence by that?
Well, the United States certainly wants to reduce Iranian influence, at least the parts of it that will stop Iraq's development and that will increase sectarianism. I think the United States recognizes that there is no way to reduce relations between Iraq and Iran to zero. The two countries share a very long land border. There's a lot of people coming from Iran to Karbala and Najaf, and for other reasons, there are Iranians doing business in the Kurdistan region, and this is natural for countries that border each other. So I don't think there's any intent to reduce that to zero. What the United States would like to see, and what Iraq would like to see, is a non-sectarian Iraq with a robust economy that operates as a U.S. security partner where it's in Iraq's interest. And Iran is a roadblock to that. Some Iranian influence is a roadblock to that. Iran was very influential from 2011 to 2014, and
Pasha.
that influence was not constructive in
Very clear. Okay.
in helping Iraq, and I think this can still the case.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, do you think the remaining of the U.S. is the only choice for the U.S.?
I don't quite understand.
Do you think the U.S. has the only choice to stay in Iraq? Doesn't it have another choice for Iraq?
Well, sure. The U.S. certainly staying is not the only choice. We left. The United States left once before, and if Iraq and the United States agree that the U.S. needs to pull its troops out, then the United States will need to pull its troops out. There's no question about that. Now, if the United States pulls its troops out, the United States has been very important in the fight against ISIS. The United States has been very important in helping the Iraqi security forces improve their equipment. A large amount of equipment is U.S., weaponry and other equipment. And the United States has been very important in training the Iraqi security forces. So these are all things that come with U.S. participation. If Iraq decides it does not want those, then no, of course, the United States will need to leave. This is up to the government of Iraq in the end.
So, other than the Iraqi Kurdistan region, there is no other part of Iraq safe for diplomats or U.S. troops here. Do you think in the future the U.S. will provide the Iraqi Kurdistan region more support?
The Iraqi Kurdistan region has always been amazing in terms of the security it was able to provide, not just to U.S. troops, but to all people who live there. It's a very impressive story. I think there's a lot of friendship between the United States and the Iraqi Kurdistan region, and there's support for the Iraqi Kurdistan region in the U.S. Congress. And I think that support will continue. So the interests of the Iraqi Kurdistan region will be important in U.S. calculations and U.S. discussions with Baghdad, of course. But should ultimately the Iraqi Kurdistan region is part of Iraq and is under the rule ultimately of Iraq in terms of security policy and foreign policy. Um, so, so there will need to be discussions as well between the Iraqi Kurdistan region and the government in Baghdad. But certainly the United States is very sympathetic to the Iraqi Kurdistan region.
باشا
Okay.
لما يرى بردو
In the past, America decided to withdraw its troops from Syria, but later it kept some of its troops there. Do you think how long do you think the U.S. should stay there in Syria and in Kurdish populated areas, especially?
I don't know. And I don't want to give you an answer that is incorrect. What the United States is doing now is what we would call conditions-based. So the reason we are still there is primarily because ISIS is still present. Now, ISIS does not hold territory, but ISIS is active in the Northeast and in other parts of Syria as well, in areas run by the Syrian government and dominated by Iran and Russia. And ISIS has been growing stronger. So we will, right now, the plan, and there are always discussions within the US government, the plan is to make sure that we have an enduring defeat of ISIS. That's the justification for the troops. Other US policies are aimed at the Syrian civil war, the Syrian government. The other issue is that...
Mr. Howard, sorry for interrupting you, because we have little time left. Do you think, isn't it the time for US to collect its troops from around the world and to get busy with its interior affairs?
So we have a very strict line between what the U.S. armed forces can do and what local authorities can do. U.S. military who are stationed around the world cannot operate under most circumstances within the United States. So all of the events that are happening in the United States must be handled by law enforcement, by various law enforcement authorities. And we certainly have enough of those authorities to do things. This is now an issue of what the political authorities want the law enforcement authorities to do. So one does not affect the other necessarily.
Okay, so the U.S. has deployed its troops around the world, and it has spent billions of dollars on them. How much did that benefited the U.S. and its people?
Well, it's had a tremendous benefit. The United States has helped the world maintain the peace since World War II. There has been no great power war since World War II. Great power wars are destructive. They devastate the world economy. And the fact that there has been no great power war since World War II means that the world has been able to develop. We've had hundreds of billions of people
what do you mean by the peacekeeping? The U.S. Troops are everywhere in Iraq, Syria, and in all the Middle East countries. But we see there is still fight going on in these countries. There is no peace there. How do you define peace?
I define peace by interstate war. So there is often not much the United States can do for civil wars, and there are lots of civil wars and insurgencies around the world. But if we look at why the United States has troops around the world, it's really an outgrowth of World War II. The troops in Europe were focused on stopping the Soviet Union from taking over Europe. The troops in Asia, in particular in Korea and Japan, were focused on stopping any kind of interstate Asian wars. And we have not seen those types of wars. It is true that you often find U.S. troops involved in wars or in unstable situations. In some cases, they are there to stop that instability. In some cases, They contribute to it. That cannot be denied. But again, the overarching effect of the US troops has been no major interstate wars, and that's been very helpful to the world.
Thank you very much, Professor Howard Schultz, for being with us via Skype. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much again for being with us.